Hello, everyone. Welcome to DigiLabor YouTube channel. My name is Rafael Groman. I'm assistant professor of media studies at the University of Toronto. Olá, olá. Meu nome é Rafael Groman, professor da Universidade de Toronto. Fiquem livres para falar em português, inglês ou espanhol no chat. And today we'll have a special online book talk with Professor Firuzeh Shokooh Valle. Professor Firuzeh is assistant professor of sociology at Franklin and Marshall College. Previously, Firuzeh was a journalist in Puerto Rico, covering violence against women and LGBTQI+ community, migration, racism, and social movements, and earned numerous national awards for her investigative work. And today, Firuzeh will present her new brand book called "In Defense of Solidarity and Pleasure: Feminist Technopolitics from the Global South," and especially drawing on fieldwork in Costa Rica in a transnational feminist digital organization. Professor Firuzeh Shokooh Valle explores the way that feminist activists using digital technologies as well as collective politics can prioritize solidarity and pleasure, advancing a new feminist technopolitics. Hello, Firuzeh. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hello. Hola. I'm so happy, so excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward. And please, hello everybody who are attending. Feel free to send your comments in Portuguese, Spanish, or English, or other language, and we can try to translate. And after the presentation, we will have a discussion. So please feel free to send your comments, your questions for us, and welcome there. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where everyone is. Good evening. So I'm Firuzeh Shokooh Valle, and I'm going to talk today about my book, about certain aspects of my book, and I'm really looking forward to having a great conversation and with you after the presentation. So first, I wanted to just briefly talk about how I came to this topic. And it was after years of thinking about the implications of digital technologies for social movements, especially for feminist movements. As a reporter in Puerto Rico, where I'm from, my homeland, I lived the digital transformation in the newsroom and the impact it had on journalism as a business and how it eroded the authority of traditional media. Activists and other communities were increasingly using digital technologies to communicate, distribute their messages and claims, and make the media accountable and other institutions. The feminist movement in Puerto Rico, particularly, was one of many political actors who embraced digital technologies. So, this led me to study first the digital media strategies of the feminist movement in Puerto Rico for my master's thesis in journalism. And this book took me back to communities of feminist activists, in this case, particularly feminist digital activists, to understand and contribute to the ways in which they are working in the present to create a liberatory future. Over the past 25 years, state and transnational institutions, I'll let you know, Rafael, still, this takes a little bit until the second one. The private sector foundations and NGOs have been in a race to include women and other marginalized communities in the digital society. The importance of integrating women as users, consumers, designers, and developers of technologies has become a global mantra against inequality. But this exciting future being constructed in which women are considered key figures of full of potential contains in its fold subtle and not subtle forms of violence. In my research, I ask the following questions. How does development discourse couple women and digital technologies as a frontier of expansion and inclusion? And what forms of feminist technopolitics are flourishing in certain regions of the global south or the majority world? What kinds of compromises and negotiations have been necessary? I examined these questions by studying two organizations that focus on gender and feminism and technology in the global south: the transnational network APC Women's Rights Program and the technology-focused co-op Sulabatsu in San Jose, Costa Rica. And I also did textual analysis of more than 200 reports and documents from mostly the United Nations, but also from private foundations and tech corporations. But today I'm going to focus on Sulabatsu particularly, which is a co-op founded in 2005. And it follows a co-op model where income is shared among the staff. It's a joint worker managed organization. It has approximately 20 associates and a core daily working staff of about 10 people. It is mostly constituted by women, but there are currently also men who are part. One of their main initiatives is to bring women and girls closer to digital technologies through associative technology-based entrepreneurship and supporting women in science and technology fields. Now we can go to la próxima. So, drawing from online archival and ethnographic methods, as well as interviews, I make two arguments. First, that development discourse preys on care in producing what I've called a third world technological woman who combines technological dexterity and entrepreneurial instinct with caring qualities, without addressing the histories that have erected the very barriers that these women are supposed to miraculously overcome. And second, feminist digital activists who are involved in development work mobilize a politics of care rooted in solidarity. Today, I'm going to focus on solidarity, but I also talk about pleasure in negotiating and define techno-capitalist paradigms of digital inclusion. Therefore, care is used in numerous ways, from making profit and furthering exploitation to building collaborative worlds. My work studies how care is mobilized in this inexorable path of digital inclusion, the ways in which it is both liberatory and urgent, as well as uncomfortable and entangled with violence. The implications of the ubiquity of digital technologies and techno-solutionist discourses and policies for solving complex social problems inflicted on historically oppressed communities are at a critical juncture. Women, queer and gender non-conforming, non-binary communities, immigrants, poor people, people with disabilities, Black and Indigenous people are increasingly considered both threats to and instruments of social, political, and economic prosperity and stability. We must continue to examine both the possibilities and challenges embedded in these inclusionary practices and policies. The stakes are very high for feminist politics. Next slide. So care flourished in my fieldwork as a political, ethical, and effective force that moved activists. These acts kept reminding me of many concepts of care from the margins of US academia by Latin American, Black, Indigenous, queers, and disabled scholars and activists. The ways in which I use politics of care is indebted to this lineage. To foreground care and emotions as a site of politics interrogates the modern rationality paradigm built on objectivity and reason. For many communities, care in the form of love and protection, eroticism, rage, joy and pleasure, spirituality, solidarity, dissent, discomfort has been embedded in their production of knowledge, an act of political resistance, of survival and protection, and of building coalitions. Care is this, but we also have to unsettle care, as historian of science Michelle Murphy's work has warned us. Development, for instance, has aimed to care for certain populations, mostly those marked as poor, marginalized, and forgotten. The state mobilizes care to the value of care so that it can be unburdened of the responsibility of caring for the most marginalized populations. Care has been embedded in discourses and practices of rescuing the other, of white saviorism, of waging war and causing death. Care is also too often associated with ideals of beauty and purity in a system that erases the ugly, painful, and exhausting work of care. In feminist digital activism, care is both liberatory and brimming with conflict and negotiations. So, what does a feminist technopolitics of care look like? We can go to the next slide. This is what an indigenous woman from the Cabecar community of the Caribbean Alto Pacuares region of Costa Rica told Kemli Camacho, the coordinator of Sulabatsu, during one of their conversations. This petition blew Kemli's mind away. Kemli is the coordinator of the co-op I study. After having worked on technology-related issues for most of her life, and having founded the internationally recognized co-op Sulabatsu more than 15 years ago, she simply could not wrap her head around the implications of collaborating on the creation of una tecnología del sentir, a technology of feelings. Sulabatsu had mostly focused on technological entrepreneurship and training women to climb the corporate STEM ladder. And this technology of feelings drastically differed from the profit-oriented neoliberal technologies and ideas of technology that Kemli had worked with during her entire life. But I perceived this moment, and after reflecting upon it many months following my last visit to Costa Rica in 2019, as a culmination of Sulabatsu's work and organizational practices rooted in a politics of care and solidarity. Next slide. For the indigenous Cabecar and Bribri women, this is one of the images of one of their one of the apps they created with Sulabatsu. Okamaswe means white man's technology. Whose communities are under the imminent arrival of internet connection, the meanings of co-designing a technology of feelings were grounded in practical results, such as creating a virtual application that could submerge users in their communities, and cosmology, or an application connected to sensors that can detect when deforestation trucks entered their lands. But their request also surpassed the practical. A technology of feelings is also about celebrating their knowledges and ways of being. It is about collaboration, joy, and respect, about being seen, heard, and felt, about following different rhythms not determined by linearity, assessments, outcomes, and results. And to be able to create a technology of feelings, and this is a quote, we also had to feel them, Kemli told me. The indigenous women told the co-op activists that to be able to work together, they had to visit their communities, sleep in their houses, explore their lands, and participate in their ceremonies. And so they did. They crossed rivers and hiked mountains under incessant rain, flooding, and paths of mud to feel the communities they were going to start a project with. Sulabatsu in this process, and this has been an evolution, we can talk about this because organizations evolve, right? is reimagining technology and the digital society in ways that enable different forms of thinking and being built upon radical interconnectedness and solidarity. Anthropologist Arturo Escobar posits that there is currently a political activation of relationality in the context of increasing social and ecological devastation, and a need of repositioning design as an ethical praxis of world making. That's a quote. For the Cabecar women, relationality has been central to their ways of being and thinking for centuries. When care is centered, technology is also decentered. And this is also, we can talk a little bit more about. Sulabatsu's objective combines multiple knowledges, the technical and what is considered non-technical, to approach different forms of oppression. And this is crucial. The co-op has slowly undergone a transformation, distancing themselves more and more from mere inclusion in the digital society. This is the base of our project and of the transformation of the co-op, Kemble explained to me. Next slide. As an example of this shift that is more critical of inclusion, Sulabatsu has recently started to collaborate in a project guided, designed, and directed by the Cabecar women to create an internet community network in their lands with the goal of achieving digital sovereignty, a term that has become more and more common among digital activists in Latin America. The community network defies state and corporate agendas of digital inclusion and offers a terrain, both literal and metaphorical, of indigenous assertion and contestation. Next slide. I'm not sure if Rafael, yes. So this is another example that I wanted to offer from one of the co-op's projects. So their 2-year project, this was a 2-year project, 2014, 2016, focused on digital security training. That's what they had received funds for women who work at pineapple cultivations in the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, piñeras. And it provides additional insights into the dilemma of focusing on digital inclusion as a solution to social problems. The defensoras, the defenders against the pineapple corporations in Costa Rica, both center and decenter the technological in their body territory activism. This project focused on conducting research on the digital vulnerabilities of women environmental leaders at the piñeras. This is a highly destructive monoculture in Costa Rica. Pineapple cultivation has exhausted the land, undermining the possibilities of other forms of agriculture, privatized lands in the hands of multinational corporations, contaminated surrounding bodies of water, and exploited the workers. Elena, one of the co-op's activists who led the initiative, explained that although funding had focused on digital security training, the co-op immediately realized through their conversations with these defensoras that their priorities were the defense of their lands as well as their bodies. The body territory assembly, theorized by various indigenous feminist thinkers from Latin America, reveals 3 important and interrelated issues that defy the promise of digital inclusion. The digital is embodied, spatialized, and detached from the guise of abstraction. Violence is interconnected, crossing numerous realms from the intimate to the territorial, and technologies can be simultaneously centered and decentered. They had to do the digital training, security trainings, because that was what the funding was for. But the project produced much more than than digital trainings for these women, which was actually not one of their priorities of the defensoras. Next slide. So it will be impossible to understand Sulabatsu's work without understanding their relationships. And here I'm going to talk about more prefigurative politics. Their bonds, income and knowledge, collectivization, horizontality, and solidarity are deeply connected with their work on technology. They enact a form of prefigurative politics, which means that they practice the world they envision, non-hierarchical, horizontal, collective, and affectionate. Their office in Barrio Escalante is organized as an open space full of natural light where everyone can look at each other. Every day at 3 p.m., we had coffee together, an almost sacred daily bonding ritual. They work, talk, and laugh, and also move through conflicts regarding differences in approaches, styles, and objectives. They have arguments on issues that range from funding sources to religion and sexuality. Next slide. Their most treasured, this is Sulabatsu. This is their house in Barrio Escalante, and this is part of where they work. Their most treasured goal is to sustain relationships of care among themselves and with the communities they work with. There was and continues to be an emphasis on joy, dreaming the impossible, and returning to the drawing board, however many times is necessary. They make space to start over, reflect, and regret. They make time for long conversations on work-related and personal problems and hopes. Thus, their vision is precisely about creating and imagining a technology of feelings, as imagined by the indigenous Cabekar and Bribri women. None of this means that work is not being done. The key is to understand who defines what work looks like. The Sulabatsu collective work when loving, caring for each other, and sharing coffee with natilla, guava jam, and fresh bread every day. They work when they talk about their lives, heartbreaks, mistakes, and regrets. They work during those long conversations in the van, traveling around Costa Rica while Juan drives from the north to the south, from the Caribbean to the Pacific coasts and back. They are also working when they interrupt everything to help a coworker who is depressed. This is all part of the everyday labor of La Cope. Next slide. During my early days of fieldwork, I noticed that much of what made this project feminist was an everyday praxis based on solidarity. The most important work of La Cope lies in its micropolitics, in how they weave relationships in each space in which they move, between the team, with communities, with the technologies that they design, think, and imagine, with a politics of care, of solidarity, and hope in building the world they dream of. That world of shared knowledges, which is their slogan. In other words, I argue that the revolution is in how they do what they do. Next slide, please. In her quest to disengage from modern colonial epistemologies and ways of producing knowledge, indigenous scholar Liane Betasamosake Simpson says that at first she did not fully appreciate how the Anishinaabe, her own community in Canada, produced theory through practice. It became clear to me that how we live, how we organize, how we engage in the world, the process not only frames the outcome, it is the transformation. How molds and then gives birth. The how changes us. How is the theoretical intervention. It was precisely Sulabatsu's how that alerted me to the meanings of a feminist technopolitics of care, a politics of solidarity that is expansive, but not without conflicts, heartbreaks, and negotiations. Relationships, as we know, are ridden with difficulties, which affect how they do what they do. The co-op is not perfect, nor their story a fairy tale. They have confronted internal fissures, conflicts, and irreconcilable differences, and their relationships are constantly being negotiated. People have left La Cope for numerous reasons: new job opportunities, changes in personal circumstances, or because they are moving to another country. But there have also been bitter disagreements on the co op's mission, structure, and procedures, personal conflicts among activists, a lack of understanding of how a co op works, and because of the very real need of earning a higher income and more secure income than the co op can provide. Often these departures have been interpreted as betrayals, ending what had been close friendships. Every time someone has left La Cope, it has implied an affective rupture. This is a quote. Kemley explained to me, cycles of financial turmoil have caused many people to leave, in addition producing tremendous emotional upheaval among the activists. These partings temporarily destabilize the flow of the organization. Activists develop certain skills, make contacts, create networks, and then take these elsewhere. One of the major challenges of Sulabatsu since its foundation has been to attain financial sustainability, the same stability they work to promote in the communities they serve. The balance between maintaining the joint worker management control of the organization with streams of individual income being distributed among the collective has been very challenging. Like many other grassroots organizations, Sulabatsu constantly has to balance their solidarity centered model based on collectivization and social justice with the material conditions they need to do their work. Next slide. And this presents us with another very important part of this puzzle of care. Funding is a very important part of this puzzle, right? In a challenging funding landscape, organizations have to contend with uneasy alliances with funders while trying to remain true to their missions, principles, and values, often built precisely on a profound critique of corporate interests. But these are not either or relationships. Upon close examination and study, we understand the compromises, negotiations, refusals, and boundaries that activists draw with funders. These moments are tied to how activists build projects and relationships of care. We can hope for a world in which social justice activists can flourish economically with absolute autonomy, while we explore the complexities that they currently contend with. Next slide. And talking about funding is very different. It's very difficult. I don't know, Rafael can maybe talk about his experience, but it's very difficult. In our many conversations about funding, Kempley has defended the autonomy of the co-op in the face of both public and private funding streams. She is ardent in her defense of La Cope. La Cope is the Spanish way of saying co-op. While also knowing that other organizations criticize Sulabatsu precisely for being open to receiving corporate funding. Well, some of these companies work directly against many of Sulabatsu's principles and goals. The organization also uses those funds in ways that dismantle corporate extractive and exploitative practices. An example is the co-op's La Voz de las Chicas del Centro de América, financed by Google. This is the next slide, which is this project's goal is to support marginalized young women and their mothers from Central America in developing their voice and critical thinking through the intersection of art and technology. Kemley explains to me, Google never intervened, and this is an alternative anti-establishment project. In line with this critique and in accord with her insistence on recognizing the agency of organizations, Kemley sees the relationship between funders and civil society initiatives as part of a dialectical process of sorts. She explains that, for example, certain topics suddenly become sexy and receive a flush of funding, but in time, these issues fall out of the spotlight and are consequently underfunded. Which come first, she asks. She explains, and this is a quote, at one point it was gender and technology, which is already declining and no longer a priority. So right now, hundreds of these organizations that work on gender and technology issues are going to start working with indigenous people, for example, which is the next hot issue, or with technology and the environment. Then the organization goes from one thing to another. I think this is such a bad practice and so determined by capital, because that's the truth. This is a close quote. Instead of focusing on funders, Kemley argues the key is remaining fiercely independent, knowing when and where to draw the line. We are a self-managed cooperative, and that is part of our freedom. Boundaries are drawn, and some things are simply unacceptable and non-negotiable. For example, over the years, Sulawatsu has consistently rejected funds from Coca-Cola, as well as from other corporations that own the cultivation of pineapples in Costa Rica, who have been after them for funding their projects with environmental defenders. Next slide. So here, yes, this is a quote from the UNESCO Science Report 2021. So the emphasis on inclusion enfolds numerous forms of exclusion and violence. The insistence on digital inclusion neglects the roots of the socioeconomic sufferings imposed upon traditionally and historically oppressed communities. The discourse suffocates imagining transformation beyond techno-solution strategies. It is fixated on a race against time. It is within this context that feminist digital activists anchored in the global South build, negotiate, and reimagine a world in which technologies thrive not on inclusion but on justice. The critique of inclusion, and digital inclusion in particular, is tricky. It is, after all, what one cannot want, like Gayatri Spivak says. Inclusion has its benefits. Being included can have, and certainly has had, fruitful and positive results. I have shown, for example, the way feminist activists work within, against, and beyond various forms of inclusion. The right to refusal is indeed fundamental, though, as many Black, Brown, and Indigenous scholars and activists have contended. And when there is refusal, there is creation. So is understanding that technologies will not solve complex social problems. Next slide. I do believe that practicing solidarity is a form of refusal. But I am not suggesting refusal or any form of contestation in particular. That is not my place. These strategies should come and have come from the activists and the community themselves. What I am suggesting is that we remain attentive to the politics of inclusion in the current systems we are living within. We are surrounded by policies, practices, and discourses that capture dreams and hopes of inclusion, while being simultaneously invested in extraction and dispossession. And who are the ones set to being included? Those who have been historically excluded as part of a technology of governance that brings, and I quote Sarah Ahmed, those who have been recognized as strangers, but also of making strangers into subjects. So amid endless social, economical, and ecological crises, we must continue to interrogate the goals and consequences of inclusion in systems that are persistently unjust and racist, misogynistic, transphobic, classist, and ableist, systems that include while simultaneously dispossessing, extracting, and exploiting. We should continue to be attentive to the imaginaries being mobilized and weaponized to lure people to want to be included. Digitalization is one of many realms that depend on inclusion of bodies, of workers, of land, infrastructure, data, consumers, users, designers, expertise, creativity, care, relationships, and intimacies. A wealth of people around the world are reinventing the digital society, I think like Sulabatsu, from community internet network, hacker spaces, platform co-ops, and design justice nodes to feminist, queer, climate justice, anti-racist, indigenous, and abolitionist grassroots organizations and coalitions. Unions fighting for decent wages and working conditions, movements for better healthcare, housing, and education, and community based webs of mutual aid. Solidarity is intrinsic to many of these projects. These may not be perfect, nor I think they're supposed to be, but I believe that this is where the most thrilling visions and practices for justice are unfolding. Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Professor Firuzeh Shokooh Valle. Muchas gracias, muito obrigado. For me, your project, your book resonates a lot, and my feeling is that this book can inspire and also resonate many of people who are present here. So thank you so much. Congrats for your book. One of the main issues for me in your book is this kind of nuances you build on this feminist technopolitics of care. Instead to be perfect or fairy tales, it's a kind of, okay, there are many contradictions, there are layers of issues, and for me this is our role as researchers to point out these limits and these contradictions. I will open the floor for you in the audience to write your questions. Feel free to write them in English, in Portuguese, or Espanol. And I will have my first question that is totally related to that. And I have some similar things with Google, especially with media co-ops in Argentina, and they're so similar. And also many of these quotes in your book and also in your presentation now, with this kind of like colonization from developed fundings. I think they're a good agenda to think collectively. But my question for you is about your appends of your book on methods, because I really like it. This appendix, because instead to be only about data collection and so on, it's a paper of reflexivity and also of care. And this is one of the things I think we as researchers and researching with communities, researching with workers, especially my kid, but yours too, this reflexivity is so important in order to maintain this feminist tech politics of care in these relationships too with our research collaborators. And you argue in this methods about honesty and accountability values in this process, and that you say it in a beautiful way that's not always easy, and so it's harder than do some kind of standard research and with so much work. But I'd like to you talk a little bit about this reflexivity, and also how it was to you to write this appendix and yeah, just to figure out that.
Thank you. That's such a great question, Rafael. And I love talking about methods because I think sometimes we don't talk enough about methods, right? And how we do what we do. Yeah, and I think my approach with this was I'm a feminist, right? And a feminist scholar, and I've been a feminist for my whole life. And one of the things that I was really questioning myself when I first started doing fieldwork in San Jose with Sulabatsu, which was in 2015, I started. Was this problem we always have, especially I think for us in academia, right? Between the I was a grad student at that time, right? But between the exigencies of academia, right? You have to have this, you have to have that, the deadlines, how many interviews, all this information that we need, right? And then of course if we become professors, the publishing, which is very intense, and then that kind of race that we have to be confronting with the time and the care we want to really spend with the people we collaborate with, right? So it's a big conflict that we're dealing with all the time. So I kind of feel that with Sulabatsu, we've created very close relationships throughout the years. But I want to say that even though I have tried to engage in feminist methodology in terms of collaboration, in terms of understanding, in terms of doing things like sharing drafts of my writing, being in constant consultation with them, sharing my work, getting their feedback. I think that there's always some discomfort because this is a relationship that is never going to be, I think, absolutely 100% reciprocal. There are ways of doing that. I think maybe participatory research design methods. But in my case, there's always that discomfort that in effect, there is some kind of power differential, right? That there is some way that I am maybe not profiting, because I'm not really profiting from any of this, but maybe I am gaining something from this, right? That makes me uncomfortable, right? And I try to do these things constantly with them. For instance, now they invited me for a book talk at University of Costa Rica, and I said that I would participate only if they invited also the activists to present together the book. I try to do things, but it is that permanent discomfort. That's like I like to look at it, this discomfort, right? That doesn't leave me. But I try. I reflect a lot on that, and leaving the field also it's like I never want to leave, because this is like I want to stay there because this is what I love doing, and suddenly I have to go to the United States and write in isolation about things that are so profound, and especially when I'm writing about relationships, right, and care and love and solidaridad, and then to do that suddenly in a little office isolated from the world seems so jarring. So yeah, this is something I'm always thinking about, this process of methods. It's hard.
Yeah, I know, and I think many people in the audience too. We have one question and one comment. I will start with the comment because it's related to my earlier question. It's from Kimberly Camajo
Oh,
Jimenez.
she's here.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know she was going to be here.
I will talk in Spanish, and after I will translate for people who don't know Spanish. En relación con el abordaje metodológico y ontológico, podría decir que el trabajo de Firuzeh es un excelente ejemplo de investigación académica no extractivista. y un poco largo para escribir los argumentos, pero creo que hay que destacar esto como uno de los aspectos más importantes de destacar y aprender. In summary, in relation to ontological and methodological approach, I would say that the work from Firuzeh is an excellent example of academic research in a no extractivist way. And so this is so important. Thank you, Kemley. And feel free other people to send your question. We have a question from Hemandini Gupta. I hope I could pronounce correctly your name. So sorry if not. I really loved hearing about this beautiful book. I'm so interested in the discussion on care. What that a term that women use as well, or were there other vocabularies they use that you translate as care? And I will take the chance to broaden the question, and if you can address also the overall problem of translation. You already talked about the hard work, and many of us face this kind of translating into English this like so deep material in like another language. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is great questions, I'm going to go to translation of something Kemley and I have talked about a lot, which is a big problem. First, to care. That's such a good question. I don't know. Cuidado, no, it's not something. I was thinking about the term. I started talking about intimacy when I started collaborating with Sulabatsu. I used that term intimacy, but then kind of intimacy didn't work. And I started reading a lot about care. And I decided that care was the most close to what I had lived with, particularly with La Cope. And, I think they use much more concept, for instance, solidaridad, right? And cariño, amor, and others. But I found in care kind of a concept that was both very rich in theory, but also that resonated a lot with what I had seen between, among them, and not only among them, but with the communities they work with a lot of care. So, but that is a good question on concepts, right? How we come up with concepts, how we use concept from the ground, or how we translate, or how we think about them. It's also part of that process of trying to be honest, to be honest. um, and I think the translation issue, that's a huge problem, right? Because even in Sulabatsu, there's people who haven't been able to read some of the things I've written because of the language, right? So that's again a huge methodological issue, right? That is a problem that again is there, that I translated my articles, but the book I haven't been able to, for instance. But I'm going to be going to Costa Rica in March, and obviously for March I'm not going to have the book translated yet. So this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem, particularly when you study, when you produce, you're an academic or whatever, wherever other job you might have, right? And in one language and are studying in another language, and also considering that Spanish is my language, right? And this is this is the language we love and communicate with, not only because it's our language, but it's because this is the language we feel in, right? It's in Spanish. um yeah.
It's great. I take this opportunity to quote an article by a Brazilian researcher called Ana Suzina. It was an article published in Media Culture and Society journal on English as lingua franca, or the sterilization of academic work. And there's a beautiful a piece about these struggles we face. from the format of like English publications and like especially academic publication into the other aspects you already told us about the words and about all this translation is not only about the proper language but all the word.
Exactly.
So this is so difficult to.
Very hard. You
Yeah.
know, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And yes, exactly. But one thing, and I am also talking to my peers here at University of Toronto. I'm new here. Is okay if the university is really committed with these values. We need to they need to value our publications in another languages because I said I will not stop my publications in Portuguese. So this is so important, and I take this advantage to invite all of you who speaks Spanish and or Portuguese to talk about this book in another language too. This is a way to navigate and to spread the word about this book. So we have a comment by Suri Cooperativa de Trabajo. Muchas gracias por ese gran trabajo. Gracias por el trabajo de las compañeras de Sulabatsu. This is a thank you message. Gracias por notar las prácticas feministas de cuidados y cómo las formas de financiamiento e incluso de investigación generan distancias en las prácticas que necesitamos resolver. Thank you so much for noting the feminist practices of care and how the ways of funding, including research funding, generate distances in the practices we need to resolve. So thank you
That's
so
a
much.
great, thank you so much. That's so great. I hope you can communicate Suti Cooperativa de Trabajo with Surabatsu. Maybe get in touch.
Great. Next question is from Anushri Gupta. Hello, and thank you for this wonderful discussion. Really looking forward to reading the book at length. And I was very intrigued by your observation about digital technologies, stress and inclusion, and how there is a need to think instead in terms of justice. Could you talk a little bit about a bit more about that?
Hi, Anushri. Thank you so much. So yeah, that's a great it's a great question, right? And I'm thinking that sometimes or many times, usually in general, we think about inclusion as a form of justice, and I don't want to, I don't want to say that that is not, important, and it's the world we live in, right? And inclusion in many things is, such a vast concept too, right? But I think that the key is in looking at what is justice. What does justice mean for these organizations, right? For the communities, right? That does not necessarily have to align with inclusion, right? For instance, in the experience of Sulabatsu, again, it's an organization. Organizations are organic, right? They change, they evolve, they grow, so it's a very interesting process also to study organizations, right, throughout the years. I think at the beginning they were more focused on, and Kemley is here. They were more focused on inclusion, right? Inclusion in STEM, inclusion in businesses, inclusion in and and as a form of justice, right? As they're part of their mission or their principles of social justice, and throughout the years, through their work with different communities around Costa Rica, and I think particularly with the indigenous women in the more recent years, they have come to realize that inclusion does not necessarily mean that justice will be made. On the contrary, sometimes inclusion actually is extremely unjust, right? um, yeah, I think that's kind of my explanation. I don't know if it's satisfactory, but or for organizations to focus more on what they believe, what their principles of justice are, beyond this race that we are living, this inexorable race, right, of including. um yeah, that's kind of it, I think.
Yeah, and maybe this all this debate in 2000 years on digital inclusion from policymakers and institutions like United Nations and UNESCO that framed inclusion as a techno solutionist or techno determinist at some point, like weakened this inclusion framework too. I'm not sure I've added. I'm particularly interested in knowing how the co-ops work and specific project that they undertook highlighted this need or reflected. This is in the book, so you can. You,
Work and specific projects, yeah, that they highlighted this need or reflect. I think that the particularly their work with indigenous women actually reflects this point very well, and also their, which I didn't mention in today, right? But also their work with young women, and the trainings they offered for many years, and trainings for young women, young rural women interested in careers in STEM. And that also has evolved very much to understand what does it mean to train young women to become part of this system, right? I think that's kind of these projects that have highlighted their own transformation in really looking at what justice means within work on technology, right? Particularly work on technology, and really kind of strengthening, instead of the technological part, strengthening the part of relationships, right? Strengthening the part of care, and that is what is supposed to be, that is what is centered, right? um Instead of other the rest. And I think that when that is nurtured, when care is nurtured, when that is centered and nurtured, that produces, it has many other results that are different, right, than from other, maybe more mainstream practices of entrepreneurship or technologically focused STEM work, and such.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Firuzeh, for your amazing book. I again invite all of you to get to know and read this book, and maybe inviting Firuzeh for other book talks, and hope we can meet in person soon.
Mm,
And
definitely.
thank you so much, everybody who attended this talk. I don't know if Firuzeh would like to talk
No, I'm so
final.
happy. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you everyone who came, and for Kembly for coming here too, to be here, and for your questions, which are really great and make me think a lot and reflect. And yeah, I'm very excited. So thank you, I very much.
Amazing weekend for everybody. Bye bye.
Okay, bye bye.